They turned away an old man at a decorated general's funeral. What happened next stopped everything. This is the true story of Elias Monroe, a man with no rank, no title, just a promise, and the kind of loyalty this world forgets too easily. But that day at Arlington, even a 4-star general had to pause, because some bonds aren't made of metals. They're built in foxholes, in silence, and in decades of being there when it mattered most. Watch this to the end, and you'll understand why millions now call him a hero. Not because he wore a uniform, but because he never stopped showing up. This is about memory, and the moment we all remembered how to honor it. They turned him away like he didn't matter. An old man, alone, dressed in his best suit, shoes shined to a mirror gloss, holding a letter that should have opened every door. But instead, the gate held firm, and the guards didn't even blink. If not, for what happened next, no one would have ever known who he was, or why he mattered so much more than the rows of medals some guests wore on their chest. It began that morning at Union Station in Washington, D.C. A low hum of voices and luggage wheels echoed off marble floors. Trains hissed like steel dragons, pausing just long enough to inhale more passengers. Elias Monroe stood slowly from his seat, hands gripping the polished handle of his weathered leather bag. He was 85, and every year of that age showed itself gently, in the way he adjusted his collar, in the stiffness of his knees, and in the quiet, patient dignity of someone who'd spent a lifetime doing things the right way, even when no one was watching. His brown blazer, just a touch oversized, held its shape with quiet pride. His tie, navy, subtle, was knotted neatly. He wore no medals, no rank, but carried the bearing of someone who'd earned both. Across the aisle, a young woman glanced up from her phone. She smiled, soft and polite. "You visiting family, sir?" Her voice carried the warm edge of the South. Elias gave a small smile back. "Not family, ma'am. A friend." He paused. "A funeral." "I'm sorry to hear that." She meant it. He nodded once, then tipped his old fedora and turned toward the exit. The platform greeted him with a rush of cool air and the distant scent of coffee and concrete. The city bustled in its usual indifference. But Elias wasn't here for the city. He was here to say goodbye. He moved carefully, every step marked by history he never told, every pause echoing the names of men long gone. The taxi line, a kid in a hoodie stepped in front of him. Elias didn't protest, didn't sigh, just waited. When his turn came, he gave the driver a small folded card. "Elmwood Memorial Chapel," he said. The driver glanced in the mirror. "That the one with the big military funeral today?" Elias nodded. "That's the one." "Some bigwig passed, huh? General something?" Elias said nothing. He just looked out the window as the cab pulled away. The city gave way to solemn spaces, flags at half-mast, marble statues casting long shadows, and then finally the chapel, gray stone, green lawn, and a sea of parked cars. Men. Uniform moved like quiet punctuation marks in the morning breeze. Elias stepped out, hand trembling only slightly. He reached into his blazer and pulled out a cream-colored envelope. "Mr. Elias Monroe," it read. "Please escort to front." With gratitude, Marion Thompson. He took a breath, folded the letter back, and walked toward the gate. This was no ordinary farewell. This was for someone who'd saved his life more than once, and for whom he would have done the same, but the guards didn't see any of that. Not yet. They saw an old man and assumed he was lost. They had no idea the story that was about to unfold. Elias walked with purpose, slow but sure. Each step closer to the chapel felt heavier than the last. His legs remembered the rice paddies of another lifetime, but this was different. This was the weight of memory, of a promise kept. At the edge of the driveway stood 2 young soldiers in dress uniform, white gloves, polished shoes, faces set like carved stone. They scanned approaching guests with tablets and crisp nods. Elias reached into his jacket. The envelope felt smooth against his fingers. He approached the checkpoint with the kind of respect born from experience. "Morning, gentlemen," he said. He held out the letter. "Here for General Thompson's service, his wife said to show you this." The taller guard took the envelope. He read the name, eyed the neat handwriting, then looked up. "Sir, do you happen to be on the official list?" Elias shook his head. "No, sir. Mrs. Thompson told me this would do." "I see." The shorter one leaned in. "We'll need to check with the master roster." Elias nodded. "Take your time," but they didn't move, not toward the list, not toward a radio, just shared a glance, then handed the envelope back. "I'm sorry, Mr. Monroe. Without official clearance, we can't let you in." Elias let out a slow breath. He kept his posture straight. "I understand." He stepped to the side, letting other guests through. Men and women in tailored black, solemn faces, badges pinned to lapels. No one looked his way. He moved to a bench just outside the entrance, sat down gently, and watched. Watched the rows of seats filling fast. Watched a folded flag resting on a casket under a green canopy. Watched a man he once carried through enemy fire being laid to rest without him. He adjusted his blazer, wiped a bead of sweat with cloth handkerchief, then unfolded a photo from his inner pocket. 2 boys in fatigues, grinning, mud on their cheeks, 1,000-yard stare in their eyes. Marcus Thompson had been 19 when they met. Elias was 20. They weren't supposed to be friends. 1 black, 1 white. In the 1960s, the world kept them apart. But war didn't. It brought them shoulder to shoulder, back to back. One night in Laos, Marcus had taken a bullet to the leg. Elias had pulled him through 4 miles of jungle. They never spoke of it after. Didn't need to. Some bonds don't require retelling. Still holding the photo, Elias looked toward the guards again, then back at the casket. The pain wasn't pride, it was absence. It was knowing his friend was only 30 yards away, and he couldn't say goodbye. A woman walked past with a child in tow. The little boy looked up at Elias, curious, then looked away, invisible again. Elias tightened his grip on the photo. A young man in fatigues passed with a clipboard. Elias called out, "Excuse me, son." The soldier paused. "Yes, sir." "Could you help me? I served with the general." "Have this letter from his wife." The soldier read it. "Let me check." He disappeared past the checkpoint. Minutes ticked by. The boy never came back. Elias leaned against the stone wall. His hip throbbed. But he waited. Because that's what you do when a promise still matters. He opened the letter again. Marion's handwriting was small and careful. "Elias, if you come, please show this to the staff. You belong there with us." He traced the words with his thumb. Not for comfort, for strength. The service music began to play softly over the speakers. Bugle in the distance. Elias stood once more. He walked to the gate, tapped the officer on the shoulder. "Sir," he said quietly, "this letter isn't just paper. I knew Marcus since we were boys. I carried him more times than I can count." The officer swallowed, uncomfortable now. "Mr. Monroe, I wish I could help, but I don't have that authority." Elias nodded. "Thank you." Then stepped back and waited, still outside, still unseen, but not forgotten. Not for long. The sun pressed down heavier now. A warm breeze drifted past the gate. Elias stayed still, back resting lightly against the stone column. He pulled out the photo again. The edges curled from years of being folded and refolded. He didn't look at. Not yet. He closed his eyes and let the memory take him. The jungle had been thick that day, Laos, 1969. Humidity so dense, it felt like you were breathing through a sponge. Their unit had been running recon. Expected light movement, turned into a trap. Gunfire cracked through the trees like dry twigs snapping underfoot. Elias, then just Private Monroe, had dropped behind, a fallen log, his rifle tucked under his arm, his heartbeat pounding loud enough to mask the shouts around him. To his left, a voice called out, "Monroe, I'm hit." It was Thompson. Marcus had always been loud, confident, even when wounded. Elias crawled toward the voice, through mud, through roots, bullets whizzing overhead like angry bees. He found Marcus slumped behind a tree stump, blood soaking through his thigh, still clutching his sidearm. "You came back," Marcus muttered. Elias smiled. "Told you I would." No time for jokes. He ripped open a bandage, pressed it to the wound. Marcus winced, gritted his teeth. "I can't walk, Eli. Then I guess I'm carrying you. Don't be stupid." 2. Late. Smoke grenades were gone. Radio was dead. But Elias had a plan. A narrow stream cut through the east slope. If he could get Marcus down there, they could ride the current toward base camp. "Hold tight," Elias said. He slung Marcus over his shoulder. Legs trembling, heart roaring in his ears. He ran. Branches tore at his arms. Mud tried to pull him down. But he didn't stop. Couldn't stop. Not until they reached the water. They tumbled. Together, cold, muddy, alive. By the time they were found, Elias could barely speak, but Marcus, he grinned. "Told you he'd find a way," he said to the medics. Back at the base, they shared a bottle of warm cola. Didn't talk about the war, just sat in silence. That was their way. Years later, Marcus would become a general, and Elias, a school janitor in Detroit, but the bond never broke. Every Thanksgiving a card arrived. "To the man who saved my loud mouth." MIT, no one else got cards like that. Elias opened his eyes. The noise of the funeral had grown louder, but inside his chest it was still 1969, still mud, still fear, still friendship. He looked at the guards again. They hadn't changed their stance. Didn't know his story. Didn't see what he saw. He folded the photo once more, slipped it back in his pocket and whispered, "I kept the promise, Marcus." Then turned his gaze back toward the green canopy, toward the casket, toward the man he once carried, and who in more ways than one had carried him too. It started with a ripple, a shift in energy. Elias didn't see her at first, but the guards did. They straightened, adjusted their posture, like something or someone just rewrote the rules. Down the main path, moving with quiet purpose, came General Linda Caldwell. 4 stars, polished shoes, eyes like they'd seen too much but still missed nothing. She wasn't just attending, she was leading, a woman of few words, but everyone mattered. She paused halfway down the row, spoke briefly to a captain, then turned, her gaze fixed beyond the tent, past the casket, to the man leaning against the stone wall, Elias Monroe. She started walking, not rushed, not dramatic, just certain. Every head turned. The murmur of conversation fell away. Even. The chaplain paused as she reached the gate. The junior officer stepped forward. "General Caldwell, ma'am, we weren't given clearance for..." She raised a hand. Didn't speak. Didn't need to. Her eyes locked on Elias. She stepped forward, close enough now that the silence felt reverent. "Sir," she said, "what is your name?" Elias took a moment, straightened, removed his hat. "Elias Monroe, ma'am." "You knew General Thompson?" "Since we were boys, and I served with him. Laos, 69. She held his gaze, then did something no one expected. She saluted. Not a nod, not a gesture. A full, formal military salute, to a man not in uniform, to a man not even on the list, but one who clearly belonged. Elias blinked, then slowly returned the salute. General Caldwell dropped her arm, then extended it. "Mr. Monroe," she said, "would you permit me the honor of escorting you to your seat?" He opened his mouth. No words came, just a nod and a whisper. "Yes, ma'am." They walked together, down the path, through the rows of uniforms and stiff suits. Every step a story, every glance a question answered. As they reached the front, the widow stood. Marion Thompson. Her eyes welled with tears. She took Elias's hand. "Told them you'd come," she whispered, and then louder. "This seat was saved for you." She gestured to the front row, to the chair directly beside hers. Elias sat back straight, heart full, the crowd still silent. The chaplain gave a soft nod, then began again. But the tone had shifted, the air had changed, because one man wasn't invisible anymore, and everyone now knew why. Elias sat quietly, hands resting gently on his knees, the folded letter still in his pocket, the weight of it now heavier than ever. Around him the service resumed, but the atmosphere had changed. There was reverence before, now there was understanding. The chaplain's voice carried over the hush. He spoke of duty, of legacy, of a man who led not with noise, but with purpose. Elias listened, but his eyes stayed fixed on the casket, draped in red, white, and blue. Below it lay the boy who once tried to fix a radio with a fork and a prayer. The man who sent Elias birthday cards with no return address, just, "Brother," signed in bold ink. Marian leaned toward him. She held a small note in her hand. "Mark wrote this a few weeks ago," she whispered. "He said to give it to you if something happened." Elias's fingers trembled slightly as he took the envelope. No seal, just his name in familiar handwriting. He didn't open it. Not yet. Instead, he held it between both palms, like it might vanish if he didn't keep it close. From the row behind, someone cleared their throat, a younger man, broad shoulders, silver at the temples. He leaned in slightly. "Mr. Monroe?" Elias turned. "I'm Daniel," the man said. "Mark's son." Elias nodded slowly. "I know. You had your dad's walk when you were 10. Daniel smiled, eyes glassy. "I just wanted to say, thank you. Dad said you were the reason he made it home." Elias shook his head gently. We both got each other through. They exchanged no more words. None were needed. Up front, a Marine approached the casket. He lifted the flag slowly, with care only time and training could teach, folded it into a tight triangle, presented it to Marian. She accepted it with both hands, then turned and offered it to Elias. His eyes widened. "No," he whispered, but she nodded. "He wanted you to have it." Elias took it slowly, pressed it against his chest. Like it held more than cloth, it held years. Wars, laughter, loyalty. The chaplain finished with a quiet prayer, and then silence. The kind that stretches, not awkward, just full. Full of everything unspoken. Elias stayed seated. Even as the others stood, he looked at the folded flag, at the empty chair beside him, then finally at the letter. He unfolded it. Slowly. Inside was a single line, written in blocky, unmistakable script. "You were the best man I ever. Don't let them forget who we were." No name, no goodbye, just truth. Elias nodded once, folded the letter back, tucked it into his jacket, then stood. Back straight, eyes clear. He had more to say, but not yet. First, he needed to walk away. Not because he was done grieving, but because he had a promise to keep and people to remind. The crowd had thinned. Only a few lingered near the casket. A woman laid a white rose on the platform. A bugler packed his instrument into a black case. Elias stood quietly, the folded flag under one arm, the letter still near his chest. He wasn't in a hurry, never had been. Not when it came to things that mattered. General Caldwell approached from behind. She didn't say anything at first, just stood beside him, watching the wind brush the flag. Then, gently, "You honored him well, Mr. Monroe." Elias nodded. He earned it every day he breathed. Caldwell looked at him, not with rank, but with recognition. "You ever think about telling people what really happened out there?" Elias smiled. "Thought about it, but some stories belong to the people who lived them." She considered that, then reached into her coat, pulled out a small card. "If you ever change your mind, we have historians who'd give anything to hear it in your words." Elias took the card, slipped it into his coat. No promises, but no dismissal either. He turned back toward the chapel. Marian stood near the steps, talking quietly with a younger woman. She saw Elias and waved him over. He joined them slowly. Marian placed a hand on his shoulder. "This is my granddaughter, Elise. She teaches high school history." Elise smiled. "It's an honor, sir. I've heard about you my whole life." Elias chuckled. "Hope it wasn't all bad. Only the parts that made Grandpa smile." They stood in silence for a moment. Then Elise asked, Would you ever come? Speak to my students. They need to hear about more than medals. They need to hear about friendship, about loyalty. Elias looked at Marion, then at the folded flag in his arms. I could do that. And just like that, a door opened. Not for recognition, but for remembrance. A week later, back in Detroit, Elias stood at the front of a classroom. Kids slouched in plastic chairs, phones hidden under desks, until he spoke. Not loud, not rehearsed, just honest. He told them about a boy named Marcus and a promise made in a jungle. He didn't use big words, he didn't raise his voice, but the room went quiet and stayed that way. When he finished, one student raised his hand. Sir, were you scared? Elias paused. All the time, he said, but I was never alone. Afterward, the teacher pulled him aside. They'll remember this, she said. Elias just nodded. He didn't come to be remembered. He came so they wouldn't forget. Back home, the world moved slower. Detroit streets buzzed with life again. But Elias didn't. He moved with the same care he always had. Measured, steady. Every morning he brewed his coffee the same way. 2 scoops, 1 sugar, sat at his small kitchen table, and stared out the window as the sun peeled across the neighborhood. The flag now rested in a glass case beside the fridge. A cousin had helped him mount it. Next to it sat the letter, folded, untouched since the funeral. Not because he'd forgotten, but because he still heard Marcus's voice every time he closed his eyes. Some days he'd sit on the porch, same old creaky chair, same cracked step at the front. Neighbors would wave. Some would stop. You're the man from the funeral, right? Elias always nodded, smiled, once then turned back to the breeze. One afternoon, a boy from 2 houses down ran over. He held a phone. Mr. Elias, you're on the internet. Elias blinked. I'm what? The boy turned the screen. There it was, grainy footage of General Caldwell saluting him. The escort. The silence. Over 2 million views. A title across the bottom. General stops entire funeral for a forgotten hero. Elias watched for a moment, then handed the phone back. He said. That's something. The boy looked confused. You're not happy? Elias smiled. That wasn't for the camera, son. That was for a man I owed everything to, in his quiet house. The letters stayed on the table. Photos, too. A few reporters called. One wanted a podcast interview. Another offered a book deal. Elias turned them all down. I already said what I needed to. But one morning he sat at the table, picked up a pen, and wrote a letter of his own. It read, General Caldwell, thank you for stopping, for seeing me, for not needing proof. You honored a man who meant the world to me, and you reminded me that sometimes someone looking you in the eye is the loudest kind of respect. Elias Monroe. He mailed it that same day. No return address, just a small smile as it slipped into the box. Later that week, he fixed the fence of the widow across the street, helped a high schooler fix her bike chain, went to church, sat in the back. Didn't speak. Didn't need to. Everyone knew. And that was enough because Elias hadn't just buried a friend. He'd resurrected a memory and shared it with the world. It started with a park bench, worn wood, peeling green paint, late afternoon sun stretching across the grass. Elias had stopped there to rest, cane in hand, hat pulled low, watching birds pick at crumbs left by kids earlier that day. A young man in uniform sat 2 benches over, army dress, fresh press, shoulders stiff with something like nerves. Elias didn't speak. Not at first. The young man noticed him, looked again, then finally stood, walked over. Sir, he said. Are you the man from Arlington? Elias looked up slowly. Depends who's asking. The young man smiled. My grandfather showed me the video, said that was what honor looks like. Elias nodded once. No pride, just quiet agreement. You shipping out? He asked. The young man nodded. First deployment, trying to remember everything I was taught. Elias gestured to the bench beside him. The young man sat. They didn't talk for a while, just watched the wind in the trees. Finally, Elias spoke. "Don't worry so much about what they teach you. Worry about the man you want to be after it's over." The young man nodded. "I will." As he stood to leave, he paused, then gave a crisp salute. No one else around, no cameras, just respect. Elias returned the gesture, tipped his hat, watched him walk away. In the months that followed, more letters came. A small class from Elise's school sent drawings, thank you notes, even a handmade medal that said Hero of Heart. Elias kept everyone, pinned them on a corkboard above the table. One letter stood out, from a girl named Janie. It read, "Dear Mr. Monroe, my dad said real heroes don't need capes. I think he was talking about you." Elias read that one twice, then placed it in a frame right beside the flag. On the anniversary of Marcus's funeral, Elias walked to the cemetery again, took a train this time, same station, same leather bag. He wore the same brown blazer. Inside the chapel, the staff recognized him, no list required. He brought with him a new letter, this one for Marcus. He sat on the low stone bench by the grave and read it aloud. "I kept going, old friend. Told some kids about us. Fixed a few fences. Didn't let the quiet take me." He paused. "People remember you, Marcus, because I remember you." He folded the letter, tucked it beneath a small stone on the grave, then rose slowly, but without help. As he walked away, a family arrived nearby. They watched him go. One whispered, "That's him." But no one followed. They just let him pass. Because now they understood. This wasn't just a story about a funeral. It was about presence, about dignity, about how sometimes the most powerful moments happen when no one is trying to be seen. At home that night, Elias sat at his table, tea in hand, letterboard full. He looked at the flag, then at the blank page in front of him. He started to write, not to Marcus, but to the future. "Dear whoever's listening, this is what it looked like when we stood by each other, when we remembered what mattered, when we refused to forget. If this story stirred something in you, good. It should, because somewhere near you there's an Elias, quiet, steady, carrying stories no one asks to hear. Don't wait until the chairs are folded and the casket's gone. Ask, listen, remember, because honor isn't just found in the medals we pin. It's in the hands we shake, the seats we offer, the promises we keep. Share this story, not for the views, but for the people like Elias, who remind us that showing up for one another still matters, and always will.